Okay, so as the door closes, we start. So it's a very discreet little group we've got here. So that should be interesting. So it should also be easy for when we do have Q&A, because I don't have to stare through lots and lots of people's wave hand. So this is the Press Perspective panel script, and you can sort of see that the state of journalism is now such that nobody actually wants to hear what we've said. but actually they're going to miss a treat with you two guys. Essentially, this is about what journalists are hearing versus actually what they've been writing about. So I'm delighted to be joined today by two journalists who are working on some of the most important publications that's actually covering the sort of medtech space, and have been doing for a long, long time. So here on my immediate right is Shani Alexander. She's from BioWorld MedTech, which is a Clarivate company. And then we have Natasha Barrow from Medtech Insight, which is published out of the Sightline Group. Shani's got more than a decade's year of experience covering sort of medtech, sort of the developments, business transactions, regulatory approvals, AI, machine learning developments. Natasha, who actually had, before she went into journalism, had some background in the sort of the medtech space in companies. She sort of focuses on diagnostics, AI, digital technologies, and she joined Medtech Insight November 2023. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
So both have been covering the industry extensively, and today we're going to sort of explore, what they've been hearing in the corridors and in the conference rooms here at LSI Europe, and how that aligns, or actually more interestingly, how it doesn't align with some of the trends that they've actually been reporting in their publications. So I'm going to still start by asking you both, what you've been hearing at LSI Europe. What conversations have caught your attention in the past few days? So, Shani, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Shani. As Mike said, I'm with BioWorld, a daily publication. We have news and data and analysis on what's going on in the healthcare industry, and I focus on medtech. Over the last few days, I guess it's financing, it's the opportunities for early stage companies. I guess, as many of you know, it's about the problems in Europe and companies looking to the US. That's one of the themes that I've been covering, and one of the themes that companies are struggling with. Well, not quite struggling with, but the MDR situation, and companies still trying to navigate that. So most of them are looking to the US market to sell their products, but at the same time having the support from investors to navigate that market and what you have to do there. So that's one of the things I've been hearing. That's quite interesting.
Natasha?
Yeah. So from the panels I've attended so far, I think there's been a bit of a focus on unmet clinical need. Like, we hear that quite frequently. There isn't much information on what that specifically means, though. I think it's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around, and it's interesting to understand what that means for a startup. Again, obviously AI is heavily topical, but also the business model and infrastructure around that. So Quibium was on one of the panels yesterday, and they were discussing how they're structuring their business model to allow for workflow automation, but also, the future of precision medicine as well.
Right. I mean, digital health is something that has been talked about a lot, for example, in your publications. I mean, have you sort of seen a lot here? I mean, I can't it hasn't been sort of necessarily standing out to me, but, I don't necessarily cover the sector the way that you guys would look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see digital health is that it's kind of integrated into everything now. There seems to be a digital element to all technologies we come across. I wouldn't say there's been a particular focus on that as a sector, but I think there's clear like themes with all the companies in terms of integrating AI. Yeah.
Right.
Can I just add, one of the sessions I attended was about AI, and because it's quite easy to start up, and there are lots of AI companies for imaging, for guiding, and there is a lot of them. So the session was about how do you get the investor interest. It's about the teams, and the teams having to not just to be able to innovate their technology, not just focus on one thing, but innovate in other areas of AI. It's about the data as well, because the data is quite important in that, because as we see in the AI space, there's so many of them offering a second pair of eyes. Yeah. So how do you differentiate one from the other? And how do investors decide, okay, this one is offering me clear imaging to be able to see the tumors. This one's doing the same thing. So how do they navigate that? So it was just offering advice to the startups. It's easy to start up, but to get to the next level and to get the money, okay, how do you find out?
Yeah, so we're going to dig deeper here on that, because I think it's an interesting point. But I probably should have mentioned that my name's Mike Ward. For my day job, I'm the global head of thought leadership for life sciences and healthcare at Clarivate, which is an international provider of life sciences, intelligence, insights, data that helps companies, both pharma and medtech, accelerate their innovation. I've been covering as a journalist the life sciences sector for over 40 years. So in fact, I've worked with both your companies and just sort of like, had management positions in both publications. So I know this sort of the companies that they represent. But coming back to that sort of sense of sort of investment, etc. So we see there's a lot of investors here, and I just sort of in the sort of conversations you guide down, and we'll come to you first, Shani, because you raised sort of investment a couple of times. What are you hearing from both investors and companies about, what they're actually, what is resonating with them? Sort of, how do we distinguish between the reality and the hype?
I guess that's a good question, Mike. I think, but investors are believing the hype a bit, because we're seeing lots of funds set up for AI. Early stage medtech have normally struggled, and there have been early stage medtech funds, but we've seen lots of AI based funds for startup, because they're believing in the potential of AI to help with diagnostics, especially, and that's one area where it's working. So the hype is kind of playing out as well. There is a lot of companies that in the space that they will weed some out, but it's bearing fruits in workflow efficiencies, in helping with guidance, in helping with imaging and early diagnostics as well. AI, these companies are helping clinicians and radiologists. So the hype is not just all hype. It's kind of grounded in reality and addressing some of the needs that's there, especially with the shortage of radiologists and things like that, to help with diagnosis and help with imaging and things like that. So it's there. It's working.
Yeah, I would just jump in on that and say that I do think investors are finding it difficult to determine the value of AI. So it's a difficult thing for them to assess. And I think what they're looking at is the impact. So that's why everything's referring back to the clinical unmet need, like how is AI then delivering impact to the patient? So they're using the structures that already exist for, biotech and medtech and trying to apply that to a new technology. I think one of the issues is there isn't as much education on AI as there is for other areas of life sciences. And I think the problem probably startups are having is being able to communicate the value that they're bringing in a language that investors understand when there's like not that foundation level of understanding. Yeah.
So, okay. So, yeah, clearly there's had to be a sort of a fast learning on what this all means. So in, what you've heard here, but also in the sort of the coverage that you guys have got, are you sort of seeing sort of any evolution in the sort of the investment criteria that these investors are now using as they become more familiar with what is possible and what is, probably unlikely? So, are the investment criteria becoming more stringent?
I mean, the answer to that is probably yes. But the thing that I am picking up on is specifically referring to AI technologies. It seems to be more about the data, like Shani said. So, like a quote I hear a lot is garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have the right data, you're not going to be able to develop a tool that is actually impactful and useful. So I do think it's going back to the like mechanisms for assessing whether something is clinically relevant is centered in data. So like the diversity of data access is one of the biggest problems for startups. So I think sometimes investors may potentially be investing because a startup has access to unique data.
Okay, so it's the quality of the data, but also then sort of how that actually will sort of integrate into the sort of the business plan, the sort of the road to commercialization.
Yeah, exactly. The road to commercialization, the ability for something to be clinically adopted also seems to be quite a major stumbling block. When I speak to startups, integration into the workflow. Ultronics, for example, they've completed, I think, a Series C £50 million raise. One of the main challenge they faced was integration into clinical workflow.
And I mean, is that something that you're seeing, this sort of, I guess, integration of data and sort of the sort of use of real world data, real world evidence?
And that's one of the things as well, because as Natasha said, physicians are not adept at using AI and the latest technology. So you have to make it easier for them to be like, okay, this is going to help me with what I'm doing. So the easier it is for them to pick up, the easier it will be for the company to convince them to use the latest technology. So that's quite interesting. But I also see that the teams it's not just it's not just like the teams have to be able to. It's not someone that just sit on their computer all day and analyze the data. They have to have the next idea. How can we use this data to do something else as well? Not just in the heart space. Can we use it in another part of the body? So it's also about evolving that technology, because you have a platform. So how can you use that platform to do other things, monetize and make the most of that platform? And that's what the investors like as well. They don't just want you to have to be a one-man band or to just have one solution. Your solution should be able to evolve and to go into other areas.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose one of the interesting things from one of the panels yesterday was they don't like the idea that you introduce a platform too early. So they like you to have a singular focus and then have the potential to develop a platform, which is interesting because obviously that's really just about the communication and timing around your vision. So, that goes back to what we do. It's about structuring your writing, putting the idea at the right time point for investors to be receptive to that.
But that's when investors come in as well. Because if you're a startup, you have the idea of one thing, and then you bring others with more knowledge of the sector and opportunities out there to say, maybe you can also do that and go into that place as well. So that's one of the messages I got from startups. It's like, you're a founder as well, but your vision could be different to how the investors see it. And that's why lots of investors have seats on the boards of startups as well, to maybe say, you can go there, or you can go, and this is a bigger opportunity for your technology.
Okay, so when you're talking to these startup companies, given the sort of the knowledge you just shared there, and the company is sort of said, "Oh, we're going to do this, and this." Do you ever kind of try and sort of like shape the conversation, sort of saying, "Well, I've heard that it's actually, when I'm talking to this investor or that investor, they pretty much prefer a much more sort of precise, focused pitch, and we're going to save the world."
I mean, I kind of take my position as a journalist is not to impart knowledge, but more to just get people talking. So I think, I definitely think those sort of conversations happen more when you're like in a community environment rather than an interview for an article, when it's a bit more of a knowledge sharing and you can kind of reveal the thinking that you've come across. Obviously, that's really interesting and important because a lot of the time you'll say something to, either an investor or startup, and they might actually choose to contradict something that you've learned.
Yeah.
Well, what I find interesting with the conversation is the fact that it's like we're the first and only, and we're unique in this space, and then based on the knowledge and the database and everything we have, and but there are other companies doing something similar or the same. How do you stand out? How do you, what does your clinical data show that makes you different? So you try to get them to share more about what they're actually doing, because if they're like, we've got this, if we're sticking with AI, this platform that offers a second pair of eyes for breast cancer so that they can see it. But I'm like, I know 5 other companies doing the same thing.
Yeah.
How do you stand out?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it is kind of pushing them to try to get to the grit of the situation and the technology and what it actually offers.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them, like Natasha said, it's a clinical met need.
And you don't want the CEO sort of saying, "Oh, we're focusing on the unmet medical need."
I mean,
What does it mean? And
they're all doing it. But then the thing is, you hear investors say, we want to invest in unmet needs. So then the companies say, our solution addresses an
unmet need. I think that's it, though. When you're interviewing someone, you get a lot of jargon that you can tell is coming from their pitch deck.
Yeah.
And it's like, that doesn't actually mean anything to me. I need to know that detail to be able to understand, how are you addressing a clinical unmet need? Like, how are you identifying a clinical unmet need? Like, that decision-making process, I think that's worth an article rather than just the statement.
So actually, that sort of segues quite nicely into, sort of how you actually really derive insights from the interviews you do. So, Shani, you've just written a really interesting piece on women's health funding, and the challenges around that. And there was a quote from the investors sort of saying, "I'll have to ask my wife." How does that conversation sort of reflect, to what you normally find and sort of the broader funding environment that you've been covering?
But it is interesting because women's health is an area that investors is like, yes, we were looking at it, but then you look at the details and they're actually not putting as much money into women's health. So that's an area that we at BioWorld are trying to cover and to raise awareness of the issues. When there is a startup that's developing something, a device to focus on women's health, we try to highlight that as well. But to put it in the bigger context, it's hard for all companies to raise money. But speaking of your quote, to get attention, because there are lots of startups and there are lots of pitches and there are lots of press releases, and a lot going on. But if you have a conversation with someone and they tell you something other than we're meeting a clinical need, or they say something interesting, then that grabs your attention and you write about it. But when everyone says the same thing, it's like, this is what a device does, this is how it's different from others. Yes, but also have something interesting to say about your device. Maybe give a patient story as well of how it transforms someone's life. And I think that's what should be like when you're talking to journalists. Don't just read from your presentation or just say what you pitch to investors and tell journalists this is what we do. But how exactly do you do it? Bring your story to life, bring your company to life, so that we can tell a really good story as well about your company. And that's what's like, okay, I want to write this, not just like, okay, here we go again, the same thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're giving us some insights in terms of actually the way that you guys look at what's presented to you in the first place.
Yeah.
So, clearly you get the press release, blah, blah, blah. We're going for an unmet medical need.
Yeah.
This technique this technology is unique, etc., etc. Natasha, you mentioned about sort of jargon, etc.
Yeah.
It's in there. So when you're actually doing your triage, because you must get hundreds of press releases a week, and you haven't got the bandwidth to do all of them justice. So what is it that piques your interest? What is it that's likely to sort of say, you know what, I'm going to spill some ink on this. I'm showing my age here. I'm now going to hit the keyboard with this. Natasha?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think sometimes it's difficult to reflect on that because we are under like time constraints, so you're making quite quick decisions. I think there's a lot of like big shiny stories, right? So there will be, big pharma, strategic investment, there'll be large funding raises, and that will like obviously immediately grab our attention because there's a reason why big players in the industry are putting their weight behind something. So you can immediately assess that there's a bigger story behind that because it is a strategic move. In terms of like press release, maybe from like up and coming companies, you are just looking for a hook that maybe does tie in with some previous coverage. So I recently interviewed Salient Bio. They've raised 2.35 million from Senior Capital. I'd interviewed Athena in a previous story and understand they had a different sort of investment thesis, and this is the result of that investment thesis. So that picked up my attention and interest because I knew I could build on some previous coverage. So I think it is a little bit about playing into like a journalist's interests as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you said, because sometimes you see a company has raised 50 million or they've got CE mark, and it's like, okay, yes, another story. But then a company raises 1.2 million for a blood test, maybe to rule out Alzheimer's or the theme that we're writing about, and it's like that's quite interesting. A startup trying to do something different or going against the grain of what's there already. But so we do that. But for me, speaking of interest, if there's areas that really piques my interest, like brain-computer interface, and there's a lot of companies in that space, and they're going into clinical trials, and investors are now pouring money into these companies. I mean, there are a lot of companies in Europe and in the US doing clinical trials. And the potential, because yes, the need is there. There are so many spinal cord injury stroke patients that can benefit from that technology. So if I see a press release from a company saying we're going to start clinical trials, I'll be like, oh, another one. But automatically I'm like, okay, another company is getting into this space, which is growing. So it's quite exciting for me.
So in that situation, are you more interested in thematic stories rather than company-specific stories? So, for example, if you see a sort of a brain into sort of
computer
connectivity, sort of like cyberborg type technology, you would bring that together with others that you've seen to create
put it into context,
a bigger picture.
Exactly. Of this is a growing area. That's the next thing in medtech, or that's growing in medtech. For example, like surgical robotics, it's another area where lots of companies are developing robots to help with surgeries. But if another one says, "Oh, we've got FDA approval for a new robot," I'll be, "Oh yeah, it's another one." But because the story it's been in development and it's been there and there's starting to gain market share, I would write a story on BCI because it's still in the clinical trials. It's not out there as yet. But but for me, something else. I mean, I mentioned financing is also an area that I write a lot about. I mean, I talk to investors to get an idea of what they're seeing, what they're excited about, and I also talk to companies. The two doesn't necessarily go together, with investors saying the money is available, and then the company saying that we're struggling to get access to the money. But so it's good to hear both sides and to see what's going on. But then the company, it depends on the stage of development, how much they're looking for, and what the investors are excited about, because sometimes they're not interested in the early stage medtech. They prefer to go after the commercial stage companies, and then so the medtech, the smaller stage, have to target the family office or the smaller funds that goes into them. But that's one area that I find exciting as well.
So both publications. You mentioned surgical robotics, and you've both been sort of covering that space, or at least your publications have. What? I mean, did you hear anything here at LSI Europe or in that space, or what can we sort of say about surgical robotics? Because one can sort of see that getting into the sort of the mainstream press, because people like robots, and the idea that they can sort of like potentially do surgery sounds pretty cool, if not science fiction.
Yeah.
Charlie?
No, the conference, I haven't heard anything about surgical robotics, actually. It's another area I haven't heard anything about. But we've been, we write about it a lot, because there are a lot of European companies that have surgical robot, quantum, moon surgical, MMI, distal motion. They're all getting FDA approval for their robots to treat patients. But the market's there, right? Because most procedures are still done by surgeons, by surgeons with their hands. And Intuitive has shown the way that the potential, and it dominates the market. And it's a huge device. So a lot of the new robots that's coming on, they're all much smaller, more nimble, more you can move them around. So the potential, the market potential for growth is there. It's not just like science fiction or just being operated by a robot. The surgeons actually need to know what they're doing, but they're investing a lot into that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard a few things through the grapevine on surgical robotics, just from like lunchtime conversations. And one of the things I'm interested in that space, like tying into like surgical robotics and like the digital ecosystem around that, is how much surgeons are willing and interested in adopting that sort of technique and technologies. Because I recently did a piece with J&J profiling their digital ecosystem, and obviously it's like tracking surgeons' movements a lot. They have basically feedback on their performance, which isn't something they had previously. So that's what I'm interested in that space at the minute.
So before we come to questions from the audience, ecosystems. When you mentioned ecosystems, and I kind of understood in the context, but actually, I was at a panel yesterday where it was talking about London and the ecosystem in London, and how London is potentially a hotspot of medtech innovation, etc. Now, LSI, this conference, it has a global perspective. There are companies from all over the world here, investors, etc. But I'd be just interested to sort of, from your perspective, where are the hotspots, both for innovation, but also for actual commercialization? Because I kind of heard that a lot of companies in Europe now find it so difficult to tread that path to commercial success in Europe that they their first port of call is the US. So could you sort of give us some sort of what you've been hearing, or also what you've been writing about in that space?
I mean, the main thing I hear is like post Series A, Series B, people are leaving to go to the US, essentially because they're not going to be able to raise the funds to continue the business in the UK. It seems like the UK has a lot of, really positive grants and schemes. Like, I think there's a biomedical catalyst accelerator that Innovate UK has just launched 5 new accelerator programs. So there seems to be like good, strong foundations for bringing research and spin-outs out of universities. But when it comes to those later stage of business, that's when, and for market reach as well, market access, that's when they choose to look elsewhere. I definitely think London and the UK is a hub for medtech innovation. I think there's a lot of really promising facilities here, like the London Institute of Healthcare Engineering. They've really put themselves on the map recently. They're one of the institutes that's running one of Innovate UK's accelerator programs. It seems like these ecosystems also have, lab space, or they have connections to be able to support startups' growth. It's not just about providing funding, it's about providing facilities to enable, manufacturing of medical devices, for example.
I'm broadening that out, not just London and the UK, but elsewhere in Europe. I mean, Europe is an innovative hub. I mean, in France, in Spain, in Germany, lots of ideas out there, developing lots of companies in those spaces. But the thing with, like you mentioned earlier, is once they've gotten to a certain level and then they have CE mark, then they still, each market, they still have to go to 27 individual countries to get reimbursement. And then that creates a problem for many companies. So that's why they decide to go through the FDA route, because they've got one big market, reimbursements there, and maybe they get a better returns on it. So that's why, even though Europe is an innovative hotbed, a lot of the companies look to the US market. And then at the same time, we see lots of US investors coming to Europe for these ideas as well, because they know the ideas are here. And one thing I didn't hear about at the conference, which I was surprised, was about the tariff and how that's going to impact investment decisions, because it will. Getting European devices, because we cover companies at different stages. Commercial stage, you have your manufacturing facility here. Now you have to go pay 10%. It's a 10% tariff in the UK, 15% in the EU. I think Switzerland's like 39%. And these companies who have the manufacturing facilities, what's that's going to happen? What's that's going to do? So that was something that I didn't really hear a lot about at the conference, but that's one thing that we're covering a lot and people are talking about.
Yeah, and I guess also it's going to impact supply chain resilience and where do you actually establish your manufacturing.
Exactly.
But of course, presidents only last 4 years, and it might all change in 2.5. So, whereas these sort of decisions, sort of maybe a 10, 15-year timeline. So maybe the people are just sitting out and thinking they'll all blow over. So do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself, please?
I'm on the floor. Is my name. I'm from Aducor. So my question is, I guess, a bit general and just like feeding off of some of your comments is we're company X. We're serving an unmet clinical need, and generic, what you've heard 1,000 times before. But I'm struggling to understand what is the advantage for us of the press at all, because we sit in front of investors, and they're like, "Yo, go, put another press release, do this," but it seems it's actually just a waste of time, because I don't understand who you serve. If I want to understand more as an investor of what's going on in the markets, I would rather look at a banking report or LSI data to see what things are going on. If if we want to explain our clinical need, of course, we put effort and resources in marketing to tell the story. But you just said, you've got to tell the story better. But isn't that also the role of the press? So I don't understand what is the role of the press for a company like ours? I mean, and we struggle to get exposure because trying to get a device in the patient is a lot of work. And there's a lot of time before that where we need to get our story out, or where there needs to be some exposure, or there should be some thematic coverage of a topic. We're in heart failure, but I guess, that's really big. And so, yeah, I just like to understand is the press still needed?
Wow. So yes. So the gauntlet is thrown now. So justify why you exist.
Exactly. It's my job important as well to investors. But I think it's who read us, right? I mean, yes, you're in front of investors, but we're read by the doctors, the government agencies. When you're doing your clinical trial and you want doctors to adopt your device, they will be like, oh, I read about this in BioWorld or your publication, and it's out there. It's putting it out there. So is it the general public as well? I mean, yes, you tell your story, but who reads us? They'll be like, I read this technology about this technology in BioWorld. I'm going to ask my doctor about it to see if they have it in their clinic, so I can get access to it. So yeah, and then the investors want to know, I mean, are the doctors adopting your technology? So it's getting there. It's the government agents who read us as well. It's yes, we do have a joke of your trade. And it's also the strategics and then the people you want to buy your company. I mean, every medtech company and pharma company, they read our publication, so they to be on top of the latest devices and what's going on. So they'll be like, I read about this company in Barrow. Well, maybe I'll follow it and see what's going on, where they are with the technology, where the clinical data is, what's the results showing. So yes, you want the money from investors, but there are other people that you have to get the attention of at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would look at it as, part of the comms and marketing strategy. So, like, what are you obviously looking to achieve from speaking to a journalist? And one of the questions I do get asked is, what is our readership? And ask for, like, a detailed breakdown on that. There are obviously various different ways of communicating news. I think, like, LinkedIn is definitely a source that people use to understand the industry. So yeah, I think it's a good question. I think definitely, like, as a startup, if I was in your shoes, I'd be looking to understand exactly what I'm going to get away from appearing in the press. But it seems like your investors want that from you. So I think, yeah, I just think about what is the result that you want to see. And, appearing in community newsletters, having a presence is important. So if someone Googles, like, the company name and you've featured in Medtech Insight, you've featured in BioWorld, you've got a media presence, that is beneficial because, your name's out there. You're setting that education level and that foundation. I suppose also if investors are looking to understand and do their due diligence, they might be able to pick up a few different insights from those articles. So it's about building, like, your brand and how you want people to perceive your company as well. I think it's a good question. I think it's valid. I think, yeah, as I said, look at whether it's going to positively affect your business. Look at community newsletters as well. I think they are really, really good. And they can really deliver value as well.
So I think you've been very polite there. So we're right at time, so I'm going to just, I've been doing it for 40 odd years. So, it's like, so what do you actually do? I think one of the things that is potentially missing, and this is where, so publications like, Medtech Insight and BioWorld MedTech, these guys have been covering sector for decades. And therefore, there is a huge amount of institutional sort of memory and insight. So, when you see what you think is the next best thing, the next best sliced bread or whatever, they're actually able to put it in perspective. They can actually sort of see what the pitfalls were. And in fact, sometimes in their questioning, and I've had this where I've sort of, spoken to startups, the questions I'm asking are sometimes they're thinking, oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually helps them sort of, shape that message, because there are plenty of businesses that have withered on the vine because they didn't communicate at the right time, at the right place, to the right people. And what I would sort of, recommend for someone who is skeptical about the value of journalists is the companies who have been successful are those who actually develop a relationship with the journalists who do belong to those publications that are actually interested in what you're doing. It's not just about sort of flashy headlines or whatever. And you can sort of, develop a perspective. So your story today might not be enough to sort of, get them to take their covers off their typewriter. Oh, again, I'm showing my age. But by seeding and sort of, just explain it, when you actually have that eureka moment, they're already, well versed in what you're doing. As Oscar Wilde said, there's one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. Okay, I think that we should finish on that. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for the question. And I'd like you to thank our panelists for these sort of the insights that they've shared. Thank you.